He was the foremost European general of the early 18th century. He defeated the French in a series of battles. His victories marked Britain's emergence as a great power. There have been two Sir Winston Churchills in British history. The original Sir Winston was a soldier of the 17th century, known as the Cavalier Colonel. As a royalist, he fought in the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, and specifically in the English Civil War, where he was wounded. After the royalist defeat, he was forced by the parliamentarians to pay reparations of £446, equivalent to around £45,000 as of the year 2020. Winston Churchill had 4 remarkable children. George became an admiral in the Royal Navy, Charles a general in the British Army, and the elder sister, Annabella, a mistress of the future King James II. But the most remarkable of them all was John, who became Commander-in-Chief of Allied forces in the wars against France. He is best remembered by his future title, the Duke of Marlborough. In 1665, Annabella became Maid of Honour to Anne Hyde, the Protestant first wife of Prince James, and the mother of the future queens, Mary and Anne. Annabella had an affair with James that lasted for the next 10 years. In 1666, through Annabella's influence, John, aged just 16, became a page to Prince James, and with the future king's patronage, quickly gained a commission as an ensign in the 1st Regiment of Foot Guards, today better known as the Grenadier Guards. Young Churchill took part in campaigns in the Mediterranean, and in 1672 in the Franco-Dutch War, where the British were secretly paid by Louis XIV of France to supply troops to assist the French army. Churchill was present at the Battle of Solbay before being transferred to the Duke of York's Admiralty Regiment, commanded by the Duke of Monmouth. The English quickly withdrew from the war because fighting for Catholic France against the Protestant Dutch was unpopular. But to keep the French subsidies, King Charles encouraged certain British troops to remain in the service of the French. This included both Monmouth and Churchill, who by now was colonel of one such regiment. At this time, the 25-year-old Churchill married the 15-year-old Sarah Jennings. She worked for Mary of Modena, James's Catholic second wife. Like Churchill, she too came from a family of minor gentry that had been financially ruined by the Civil War. Also at this time, James's eldest daughter Mary married William of Orange. From this, an Anglo-Dutch defensive alliance was agreed, and Churchill was sent to The Hague as the military representative. In 1685, following King Charles's death, James succeeded to the throne despite his conversion to the Catholic faith. But support for him soon collapsed due to his pro-Catholic policies. This created instability within both England and Scotland, something leading politicians wanted to avoid given recent memories in Britain and Ireland. Consequently, rebellions against the king were rapidly defeated. First, in June, the Duke of Argyll's rising in Scotland, and then a month later, Monmouth's rebellion in southwest England. The campaign against Monmouth was led by the Earl of Feversham, with Churchill commanding the infantry. Although subordinate to Feversham, it was Churchill's administrative capacity, his tactical skill, and his courage in battle that was pivotal to the victory at Sedgemoor, for which he was promoted to Major General and made Baron Churchill, giving him a seat in the House of Lords. Churchill, though, was uneasy about Monmouth's subsequent execution and remained concerned about King James's policies, saying,
"If the king should attempt to change our religion, I will instantly quit his service."
He even personally told the king,
"I have been bred a Protestant, and intend to live and die in that communion."
Churchill feared that a wider rebellion would wreck his career, and he had no intention of being, like his unfortunate father, on the losing side. Meanwhile, William of Orange had been invited by 7 notable English nobles to invade England and assume the throne alongside his wife, Mary. William needed no further encouragement and landed with an army at Brixham in Devon in November 1688, before advancing to Exeter. Princess Anne, the future Queen Anne, sent a message to William.
"I wish you good success in this so just an undertaking."
James's army, still under the command of Lord Feversham, moved to Salisbury. But many senior officers were not eager to fight against William, including Churchill, who had recently been promoted to Lieutenant General. Lord Feversham advised the king to have him arrested, but James hesitated, and shortly afterwards Churchill, together with 400 other officers and men, slipped from the royal camp and crossed to William's army at Axminster. He left behind a letter of apology, which read,
"I hope the great advantage I enjoy under your majesty, which I would never expect in any other change of government, may reasonably convince your majesty and the world that I am actuated by a higher principle."
Realizing that if he could not keep Churchill, a man brought up in his court, any chance of remaining king was dashed. He fled to France, taking his new son and heir, born of his second wife. Churchill was swiftly created Earl of Marlborough by William and Mary and appointed to the Privy Council. However, the new king would always have reservations about the man who was prepared to change sides, especially when that man and his wife were strong supporters of the Queen's sister, Princess Anne, whose claim to the throne was stronger than that of William. Irrespective, Marlborough's first official task under William and Mary was to modernise the English army. This was well timed, as England was about to join the powerful coalition against France's ambitious Louis XIV. Churchill saw action during the early part of the 9 Years' War. At the Battle of Walcourt in August 1689, Marlborough, still less than 40 years old, won praise from the Allied Commander-in-Chief, the Dutch Field Marshal, Prince George Frederick of Waldeck.
Despite his youth, he displayed greater military capacity than do most generals after a long series of wars. He is assuredly one of the most gallant men I know.
But with the former King James landing in Ireland in an attempt to regain the throne, William recalled Marlborough to take command of all troops in England, while he left for Ireland. Marlborough was given the additional responsibility of being military advisor to Queen Mary in the king's absence. But she had scant liking for this appointment, telling her husband,
"I can neither trust nor esteem him."
William defeated James II at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690, and James abandoned his army and fled back to France. Marlborough now replaced William as the army commander in Ireland, where he successfully accomplished the task of defeating any lingering opposition to William. While King William recognised Marlborough's qualities, he gave him no further commands at this time. Using his position in the House of Lords, Marlborough, in an attempt to force the king's hand, expressed dissatisfaction about William's preference for foreign commanders. To William, this was further grounds to distrust Marlborough. Angered by Marlborough's intrigues in Parliament, the Queen ordered her sister to dismiss Sarah from her household. Anne refused. So, acting on evidence provided by a certain Robert Young, the Queen had Marlborough arrested and sent to the Tower of London, charged with having signed a letter supporting the restoration of James II. However, Robert Young turned out to be a forger and a fraudster. His evidence was discredited, and 5 weeks later, Marlborough was released from the Tower. Queen Mary's death in 1694 drew reconciliation between William and Anne. Marlborough hoped that this would lead to his return to the army. However, he was made to wait. but war in Europe was about to resume. The War of Spanish Succession would see England, the Dutch Republic, and the Austrian Holy Roman Empire establish a grand alliance to prevent Louis XIV's planned domination of Europe. With his health deteriorating, William appointed Marlborough as commander of English forces and as ambassador extraordinary for the conference in The Hague that would form the Grand Alliance. But as Marlborough remarked,
"The king's coldness to me still continues."
William died shortly afterwards and Anne became queen. His death deprived the Grand Alliance of its obvious leader in the fight against France, Spain, and some German states that saw an opportunity to enhance their position at the expense of Austria's Holy Roman Emperor. Marlborough's position was now strengthened through his close relationship with the new queen, who showered appointments upon him and Sarah, giving them a combined income of over £60,000 per year, equivalent to nearly £7 million as of the year 2020. The Grand Alliance gave Marlborough command of English, Dutch, and hired German forces. Although he could give orders to Dutch troops in battle, at all other times he had to first gain the consent of accompanying Dutch field deputies. Their concern was fear of invasion by France, while Britain was motivated by a much wider international desire to curb the growing power of France. Marlborough's campaign, initially constrained to the Low Countries, began well. He outmanoeuvred the French and captured a series of towns in southern Belgium, including Liège. For this he was elevated by a delighted queen to a duke. The following year, Marlborough managed to capture further towns, but the Grand Alliance failed in its main objective, the capture of Antwerp. Both Britain's and Marlborough's position in the Grand Alliance depended not just upon the success of his campaigns, but also upon the political situation at home. This was complicated. The Tories were in power under the leadership of Sidney Godolphin, a friend and colleague of Marlborough. Godolphin and his Tory ministers supported the Continental War. But the majority of Tory MPs believed it should be a trade war, with the Royal Navy attacking French and Spanish overseas possessions. Despite the political pressure from home and the military pressure from the Dutch, Marlborough decided in 1704 that he needed to assist the Austrians, who were under attack from the French, with help from the Bavarians to the west and from the Hungarians to the east. Without this help, he believed, the Austrians would soon be forced out of the war. Marlborough knew the Dutch would never agree to such a campaign. He therefore decided to mislead the Dutch. He obtained their approval to move the English army to the Moselle Valley. Once there, he managed to slip the Dutch leash and marched 250 miles south into southern Germany. There, Marlborough sought to attack the French and Bavarian armies on the Danube. In August, he first captured the Schellenberg Heights before linking up with the Austrian army commanded by Prince Eugene of Savoy. Between them, they inflicted a crushing defeat on the Franco-Bavarian army at the Battle of Blenheim. This triumph knocked Bavaria out of the war and ruined Louis XIV's immediate hopes of victory. And with the capture of a number of towns along the Rhine and the Moselle, Marlborough had, that summer, altered the balance of power in Europe. Even sceptical Tory MPs could not hide their patriotic admiration. In recognition, the Queen, despite by now tiring of Sarah's tactless behaviour, bestowed the royal manor of Woodstock upon Marlborough and promised him a fine palace there. Marlborough achieved little success during the campaigns of 1705, and this continued during the early months of 1706. But with Louis XIV gaining early successes in Italy and Alsace, he goaded his generals in the southern Netherlands to attack Marlborough and avenge their defeat at Blenheim. But Marlborough swiftly marched into enemy territory and at the Battle of Ramillies won his most convincing victory. With less than 3,000 Grand Alliance casualties, this battle cost the French over 20,000 dead and wounded. The victory was timely. In London, Godolphin's Tory government had become dependent upon Whig support for the Continental War. For this, they demanded a share of government appointments. And with a number of leading Tories in the government forced to resign in 1707, Godolphin had little option other than to replace them with Whigs, including Robert Walpole as Secretary of State for War. The situation was further complicated as Sarah was a staunch Whig, while Queen Anne supported the Tories. This further widened a growing rift between the two. That same year, 1707, the French made a military comeback and by early 1708 had captured Bruges and Ghent. With political pressure at home and his endless efforts to hold the Grand Alliance together, Marlborough was becoming downhearted. But he received a major boost when Prince Eugene, his co-commander at Blenheim, arrived with his army in the southern Netherlands. Together, they set about regaining the initiative. Following a forced march, the Allies crossed the River Scheldt at Oudenarde, just as the French army were crossing further north with the intent of besieging the town. Marlborough moved decisively to engage the enemy, defeating them conclusively at the Battle of Oudenarde. Once again, he had restored the strategic initiative and completely demoralized the French. In 1709, an increasingly desperate Louis XIV ordered his army to advance and fortify the tiny village of Malplaquet on the French border. Here again Marlborough clashed with the French army. Dutch infantry on his left flank under the Prince of Orange made desperate charges, only to be cut to pieces. On the other flank, Prince Eugene attacked and suffered almost as badly. But to resist the pressure on their flanks, the French weakened their centre, enabling Marlborough to break through and claim victory. But with high casualties in this battle, the Tories argued that Marlborough and Godolphin were merely leading the country to ruin. Under pressure, Godolphin's government opened peace talks with France, but Louis XIV would not concede to Whig demands for his grandson, Philip V, to surrender the Spanish throne. Publicly, Marlborough supported the government, but privately he doubted the French would accept such a dishonourable agreement. Then later that year, the Tories won a landslide general election victory, enabling the Queen to dismiss Godolphin from government. Despite this, Marlborough returned for one final campaign in 1711. Again, he outwitted the French, but irrespective of the strategic gains that summer, the Tories had no intention of letting the war progress. In secret talks, Britain secured favourable terms in the Treaty of Utrecht, including ownership of Gibraltar, plus the French recognition of Queen Anne as sovereign, and an end to any support for the Jacobites. Conversely, it was agreed that Philip V would remain on the Spanish throne. This treaty marked Britain's emergence as a great power. But with no political support and frosty relations with the Queen, Marlborough's time in command was over. On the 29th of December 1711, he was dismissed from all his offices following a contrived claim against him of corruption. The other members of the Grand Alliance were stunned at the turn of events, and especially at Marlborough's dismissal. Although they continued the war, within 2 years they too had agreed to the Treaty of Utrecht. After the war, Marlborough maintained his close contact with the Hanoverians. He was determined to ensure a bloodless Hanoverian succession on Queen Anne's death, especially as the country remained divided between Whigs, Tories, Jacobites, and Hanoverians. Then suddenly in 1714, he was summoned by the Queen and reinstated as head of the army. Queen Anne had, in her final days, turned to two men, one being Marlborough, to assume the reins of power to ensure a smooth succession for the Hanoverians. Upon her death, the Privy Council immediately proclaimed the Elector of Hanover as King George I of Great Britain. This led to a Jacobite rebellion the following year. Marlborough presided from London over the defeat of the 1715 Jacobite Rising, with his former ADC and the man who would succeed him as head of the army, Lord Cadogan, commanding the operation. A year later, the Duke suffered a stroke, prompting his final retirement. 3 years later, in 1719, the Marlboroughs were able to move into the east wing of the unfinished Blenheim Palace. But he had just 3 years in which to enjoy it before his death in 1722. John Churchill, 1st Duke of Marlborough, is remembered as a superb battlefield commander. He was in many ways ahead of his time and his contemporaries. He was more adaptable in battle, more inclined to use feints and tactical cunning, and importantly, more prepared to look after his troops. His ability to read ground, so important for a soldier, and to assess the enemy's behaviour in battle, was unsurpassed. He was not, though, a great innovator, nor did he radically redefine military theory. Essentially, he was the greatest practitioner of early 18th century warfare, with his use of fire and manoeuvre and of coordinated all-arms attacks. These were the foundations for his great victories. Marlborough always paid great attention to logistics to keep his army moving and well supplied. He frequently established supply points 2 weeks ahead of the army, and he ensured that boots and saddles were regularly replaced. This allowed him to march a substantial army at incredible speed over long distances, frequently to the complete surprise of the enemy. Unsurprisingly, he is still today consistently ranked as one of the greatest military commanders of the modern era.